He had not come to make a scene. That was the first thing people got wrong when they heard the story later. They assumed he must have walked in angry, must have said something sharp at the door, must have done something to deserve what came next. He had not. Everett Dolan walked into the lobby of Pressfield Industrial Holdings on a Tuesday morning in November, carrying a manila folder, a maintenance log binder, and the kind of quiet that comes from a man who has learned to keep his voice down in rooms that were not built for people like him. The lobby was the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small before anyone said a word. 40 feet of polished travertine floor. A reception desk made of something that looked like marble but probably wasn't. The Pressfield name mounted in brushed steel letters on the wall behind it, each letter a foot tall. Everett noticed all of it the way a man notices weather, registered it, filed it, and kept walking toward the desk. The woman at reception looked up at him the way people look at delivery drivers who come to the wrong entrance. He told her his name. He said he had documentation regarding the service contract for the HVAC and mechanical systems at the Pressfield Distribution Center on Route 9, and that he needed to submit it to the contracts department before the close of business to meet the terms of the existing agreement. He said it plainly, without apology, because there was nothing to apologize for. She asked if he had an appointment. He said he did not, but explained that the submission deadline was written into Section 4 of the contract and that he had the right to deliver the documents in person to the registered address of the holding company. He said he was not asking to meet with anyone. He just needed the documents received and time-stamped. She picked up the phone. She spoke in a low voice. She put the phone down and told him someone would be with him shortly and asked him to wait near the seating area by the east wall. He waited. He was good at waiting. Everett Dolan was 43 years old. He had worked with his hands since he was 17, starting at a garage in Millfield that his uncle had owned, learning the language of machines the way some people learn music. Not from a book, but from touch. From the sound a belt makes when it's about to snap. From the vibration in a pipe that tells you pressure is building somewhere you can't see. He'd gone to trade school at night while working days. He'd built his own maintenance company from nothing. Just him and a used van and a list of clients he kept in a notebook because he didn't trust software to hold the things that mattered. He had a daughter. Her name was Iris, and she was 9 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, the kind of brown that looks gold in afternoon light. Her mother had died 4 years ago, from something fast and merciless that didn't ask permission and didn't give time to say everything that needed to be said. Everett had kept going because Iris needed him to keep going. It was not complicated. It was the only math that made sense. The contract with Pressfield Industrial had been the largest job he'd ever landed. A 3-year maintenance agreement for their distribution center, HVAC, mechanical systems, emergency equipment. It was the kind of contract that meant he could hire 2 more people, that meant Iris could have the kind of stability that doesn't shake when a client cancels. He had done the work correctly. He had the logs to prove it. He had been waiting 11 minutes when Garrett Pressfield walked into the lobby. Garrett Pressfield was not the founder of the company. That had been his father. Garrett had inherited the name, the building, the money, and the particular confidence that comes from never having had to introduce yourself in a room where you weren't already expected. He was 51, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled a suit not because he was physically imposing, but because he had never learned to make himself smaller. He came through the glass doors from the executive corridor, and he saw Everett standing near the east wall, and something in his face shifted. Not to anger, not immediately, but to a kind of assessment, the way a man assesses an object that has been left somewhere inconvenient. He walked to the center of the lobby. He did not walk toward Everett. He stopped and spoke from a distance that communicated exactly how much space he believed existed between them. He said he'd been told someone was here about the Route 9 contract. Everett said yes, that he was submitting the quarterly documentation as required by the service agreement, and that he was prepared to leave the materials with anyone authorized to receive them. Garrett Pressfield looked at the manila folder. He looked at the binder. He looked at Everett the way men like him look at paperwork they expect to disappear. He said the contract had been terminated. Everett said he had not received written notice of termination, which under Section 7 of the agreement was required 30 days in advance and needed to be sent by certified mail to the business address on file. Garrett Pressfield smiled. It was a specific kind of smile, not warm, not amused, but the smile of a man who has learned that smiling in these moments reads better in any room than what he is actually feeling. He said that was a matter for the legal department, and that this was not the appropriate venue to be conducting business disputes. Everett said he was not conducting a dispute. He was delivering documents. There were people in the lobby, a woman at the reception desk, 2 men near the elevator bank in suits who had stopped pretending not to listen, a facilities worker pushing a cart near the far wall who had gone very still. Garrett Pressfield turned to the woman at reception and said to call building security. Everett did not move. He did not raise his voice. He stood the way men stand when they have decided that the only thing they have left is the fact of their own presence, and they intend to make that presence count for something. Security arrived in under 2 minutes, a younger man, maybe 25, who looked uncomfortable in a way that suggested he had not been told what he was walking into. He stood to Everett's left and asked if everything was all right. Garrett Pressfield said it was not, said that this individual had been asked to leave and was refusing, and said he wanted him removed. The security guard looked at Everett. Everett looked at the security guard. There was a moment between them, brief, wordless, in which the younger man seemed to understand that what he was being asked to do was not what it was being presented as, and then he looked away, because that is what people do when the cost of understanding is too high. Everett said he would leave. He said it calmly. He said he just needed a moment to place his documentation on the reception desk so there would be a record of the attempt at delivery. Garrett Pressfield said he would do no such thing. He said it loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. Then he said something else. He said it almost lightly, the way people say things they have said many times before, and expect to say many times again without consequence. He said, "You people always think a piece of paper makes you equal." The lobby went quiet in a particular way, not the quiet of an empty room, the quiet of a room full of people who have all chosen, in the same instant, to look somewhere else. Everett did not respond. He held the folder at his side. He looked at Garrett Pressfield for a long moment, not with anger, not with the kind of expression that could be used against him later, but with the steady, level look of a man who is memorizing something. Then he placed his business card on the edge of the reception desk, slowly, deliberately, face up, picked up his binder, and walked toward the door. He did not hurry. Behind him, Garrett Pressfield laughed. It was a short, satisfied sound, the kind a man makes when he believes a problem has resolved itself. Everett heard it. He did not turn around. He walked to his truck, which was parked at the meter on the street outside, and he sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. He looked at the folder in his hands. Then he looked at his phone. He had 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize, and 1 text from Iris's school saying she'd done well on her science quiz, that she wanted to tell him herself but couldn't wait. He smiled at that, because she had always been unable to wait when things were good. Her mother had been the same way. He started the engine and drove. What Garrett Pressfield did not know, what he had no reason to know, because men in his position rarely trouble themselves with the paperwork of the people they dismiss, was the specific nature of what Everett had been trying to submit. It was not simply a maintenance log. It was a quarterly safety certification for the facility's fire suppression and ventilation systems, required under the terms of the contract and, independently, under State Commercial Building Code. The contract with Pressfield Industrial had included a clause, at Everett's insistence, during the negotiation, that made him the responsible contractor of record for those systems for the duration of the agreement. That designation carried legal weight that did not disappear because Garrett Pressfield had decided, sometime in the past several weeks, that he no longer wanted to pay for it. The termination of a contract did not automatically transfer that designation. The absence of a proper handover to a replacement contractor meant that, technically, Everett Dolan was still the responsible party, and the failure to file the quarterly certification, which he had attempted to do and been prevented from doing, meant that the facility was operating out of compliance. Everett knew this. It was, in fact, the reason he had come in person rather than simply emailing the documents. He had wanted there to be a record. He had wanted someone to witness that he had tried. He had gotten more witnesses than he expected. He drove to the office of his attorney, a woman named Patricia Okafor, whom he had met when she'd handled the estate paperwork after his wife died, and whom he had stayed in touch with because she was the kind of person worth staying in touch with. She was not a contracts lawyer specifically, but she knew enough, and more importantly, she knew who to call. He put the folder on her desk and told her what had happened. He told her the exact words. He told her about the lobby, the security guard, the smile, and what was said loud enough for a room full of people to hear. Patricia Okafor listened without interrupting. She had the quality of someone who has heard many difficult things and has learned that interrupting does not make them easier. When he finished, she looked at the folder for a moment. She said, "You understand what you have here?" He said he thought he did. She said it wasn't a question. There were two parallel tracks, and they moved simultaneously, which was the part that Garrett Pressfield's lawyers would later describe as unfortunate timing, though there was nothing unfortunate about it from where Everett stood. The first track was civil. Patricia reached out to the legal department at Pressfield Industrial Holdings with a letter that was 14 pages long and cited 9 specific clauses of the existing contract, 4 provisions of state commercial code, and 1 federal workplace safety statute. The letter did not make demands. It made observations. It was the kind of letter that is designed to be read by people who understand that observations of this nature tend to precede demands, and that the demands will be larger than what a timely response would have cost. The second track was regulatory. Everett filed a report with the State Office of Building Safety, noting that he had been prevented from submitting required safety documentation for a facility for which he remained the contractor of record. He attached his time-stamped photo of the business card on the reception desk, which had been taken at the moment he'd placed it there. He attached a notarized account of the events in the lobby, signed by him, which referenced the presence of multiple witnesses. He did not list the witnesses by name. He didn't need to. The report was sufficient to trigger a mandatory inspection inquiry. The inspection was scheduled within 10 days. Garrett Pressfield's lawyers responded to Patricia's letter on day 4. Their response was written in the register of men who believe that volume and confidence are interchangeable with substance. It disputed the characterization of events, questioned the validity of the contractor of record designation, and suggested that Mr. Dolan's conduct in attempting to forcibly deliver documents to a company that had terminated his services constituted harassment. Patricia read the response over the phone to Everett, and when she finished, there was a silence. He asked if she was worried. She said no. She said the response was what she expected, and that it was the kind of response that made certain things easier. He asked what things. She said that when a party disputes facts that are witnessed, documented, and time-stamped, it creates a record of the dispute alongside the facts. That record becomes useful. He said he understood. He picked Iris up from school that afternoon, and she told him about the science quiz on the way home. She had gotten every question right except one, and she explained the one she'd gotten wrong with a precision that told him she'd already worked out the correct answer on her own, and was mildly annoyed that she hadn't seen it in time. She had her mother's inability to let incorrect things remain incorrect. He found it steadying. He did not tell her about the lobby. She was 9. There would be time later to explain what had been said in that room, what it meant, and why he had not let it move him. Right now, she was talking about convection currents, and he was listening, and that was what the evening needed to be. The inspection happened on a Thursday. It was conducted by 2 officials from the State Building Authority and 1 from the Regional Fire Marshal's office. They arrived without announcement, as such inspections are permitted to do. The facility on Route 9 had not had a certified inspection in 93 days. The suppression system in the northeast section of the warehouse had a pressure irregularity that had been noted in Everett's last internal report, the report he had been trying to submit when he was removed from the building, and that had not been addressed. The facility was issued a conditional stop-use order for 2 sections of the warehouse. The order was not a closure, but it was public record. Garrett Pressfield's business carried commercial contracts with 3 regional distributors whose agreements contained compliance clauses tied to facility certifications. 2 of those distributors had legal teams that received automated alerts when stop-use orders were filed against facilities in their supply chain. Both reached out to Pressfield Industrial within 48 hours. The first meeting between Garrett Pressfield and his legal team after the stop-use order was described by one of the junior associates present as the quietest 40 minutes he had ever spent in a room with 6 people. Garrett did not shout, he did not pace. He sat at the head of the table, and he was very still, and the stillness was worse than anything else could have been. His lead attorney said the situation was manageable. Garrett Pressfield asked how a maintenance contractor, with a van and a folder, had managed to trigger a regulatory inspection, a stop-use order, 2 distributor compliance reviews, and a 14-page legal letter within 2 weeks of being removed from the building. His attorney said it was a matter of documentation. Garrett Pressfield looked at him for a long moment and then looked at the wall, and the junior associate would later say that in that moment something changed in the room. Not the air, exactly, but the understanding everyone had of who was sitting at the head of the table and what that actually meant. The settlement discussions began on day 19. Patricia Okafor did not hurry them. She had explained to Everett at the beginning that patience, in situations like this, was not a luxury. It was a tool. The longer Pressfield Industrial operated under the shadow of the compliance review, the more the cost accumulated, not just financially, but in the particular way that matters to companies whose business runs on the confidence of other businesses. Everett understood patience. He had learned it in small rooms and loud machines, and the long nights after Iris fell asleep when the only sound was the refrigerator and whatever he was carrying. He was not in a hurry. The settlement included full payment of the outstanding contract balance which Garrett Pressfield had stopped processing in the month before the termination. It included a formal correction to the contractor of record designation, properly transferred to the replacement contractor with all required documentation. It included a sum that Patricia described as meaningful and that Everett did not discuss with anyone other than her, because the amount was secondary to what it represented. It also included, at Everett's specific request, a letter on company letterhead acknowledging that the quarterly safety documentation had been properly prepared and that the failure to receive it had been the result of an administrative decision made by company leadership. Garrett Pressfield's lawyers had argued against the letter. They had argued against it longer than they had argued against anything else. Garrett Pressfield had eventually told them to let it go. He signed it on a Friday afternoon. Nobody was in the room to see it happen. That was fine. The record would be. Everett received copies of everything by courier that same afternoon. He sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread in front of him and read them carefully, the way he read anything that mattered, not quickly, not skimming, but actually reading each line. When he finished, he stacked them neatly and put them back in the envelope. Iris was in the next room doing homework. He could hear her chair, scraping occasionally against the floor the way it did when she shifted her weight. She had never learned to sit still, and he had never tried to teach her, because her mother had been the same way, and he had loved that about her mother. He made dinner. He made the pasta dish that Iris liked, the one with the slightly too much garlic that she had declared, at age 7, was the correct amount of garlic, and he had never corrected her. Over dinner she told him about a project her class was starting, something about local history, and she had already decided she wanted to do it about bridges. She wanted to know how they worked. She wanted to understand the load distribution. He told her what he knew, which was a reasonable amount, and she listened in the particular focused way she had, the way that told him she was not just hearing, but filing. He looked at her across the table. She had her mother's eyes. She had his stubbornness, which was not always convenient, but he had stopped thinking of it as a flaw some years back. Stubbornness, he had come to understand, was only a problem when the thing you were holding on to wasn't worth holding. When it was, stubbornness was just the right word for the right thing. He did not tell her what had been settled that day. Not because he was hiding it, but because the kitchen table in the evening was its own kind of territory, and he was protective of it. There would be time to explain. There would be time to tell her that men in large buildings with their names on the wall sometimes make mistakes about who they are dealing with, and that the correction of those mistakes is not always loud, is not always dramatic, does not always look like what the movies say it looks like. Sometimes it looks like a folder. Sometimes it looks like a time-stamped photograph and a notarized statement. Sometimes it looks like 14 pages that observe things carefully enough that they don't need to shout. He would tell her that. Not tonight, but soon. Tonight he let her talk about bridges, and he listened to every word, and when she said something technically precise, which she did, twice, correctly, he told her she was right, because she was, and because she deserved to know when she was right. Later, after she was in bed, he stood at the kitchen window for a while. The street outside was quiet, the way residential streets are at 9 o'clock on a weeknight. The specific quietness of ordinary life continuing as it does, without drama, without announcement. He thought about the lobby. He thought about the sound of Garrett Pressfield's laugh, short and satisfied. He thought about the way the room had gone quiet after those words, the specific kind of quiet that is not emptiness but weight. He had carried that weight out of the building. He had carried it to Patricia's office. He had put it down on her desk inside a manila folder and let it become what it actually was, documentation. That was what he'd had. Not money, not lawyers on retainer, not a name on a wall. Just the work, done correctly, logged carefully, and the knowledge of what it meant. He turned off the kitchen light. The envelope with the settlement documents was on the counter. He would file it properly tomorrow, make copies, put the originals somewhere safe. He was methodical about these things. He always had been. He walked down the hall and paused for a moment outside Iris's door. He could hear her breathing, the steady, unhurried rhythm of a child who has no reason to be awake and therefore isn't. He stood there for just a moment. Then he went to bed. The company letterhead sat in the envelope, signed, dated, and permanent in the way that only documents can be. The kind of permanent that doesn't need anyone to witness it because it has already been witnessed by the process that produced it. Out on Route 9, the distribution center sat under its ordinary lights. The pressure irregularity in the northeast section had been repaired by the replacement contractor, properly this time, properly documented. The systems worked the way systems are supposed to work. Everett Dolan had made sure of that, even from a distance, even after the door had been closed in his face. That was the kind of man he was, the kind who does the job correctly, keeps the log, and trusts that the record will eventually say what needs to be said. It had.